Just over 100 years ago, a wandering prospector, a German by origin called Karl Mauch, searching for gold, came through these remote hills on a long trail and stumbled on this. He was the first white man ever to see it. And what he'd found, though he didn't know, were the largest man-made structures in any part of old Africa south of the valley of the Nile. What were these mysterious ruins found so unexpectedly in the far interior of Africa? About the ancient history of the black peoples, nothing was remembered in the outside world or even known. Today, at last, we're beginning to learn. We know now that these great buildings stood at the heart of a powerful black kingdom. Within these almost overwhelming walls, the kings lived in royal seclusion, adding to their mystery according to the nature of kings. Invested with a religious as well as a temporal power, they were believed to embody the whole welfare of their people. A stone-built city in the heart of Africa, and yet the white people who first saw it were so blinded by their prejudices that they could not believe the evidence of their own eyes. Rather than face the possibility that Africans might have a history of their own, they fabricated exotic explanations and imagined fantastic rites in honor of faraway monarchs like King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. The famous German philosopher Friedrich Hegel had set the tone. Though he'd never been to Africa and knew nothing of its people, this was his publicly expressed opinion in 1831.
This is the land where men are children, a land lying beyond the daylight of self-conscious history and enveloped in the black color of night. At this point, let us forget Africa, not to mention it again. For Africa is no historical part of the world.
Hegel was not alone. His views were echoed widely. An English explorer who did know Africa and had studied some of its customs and languages, Richard Burton, had this to say.
The study of the Negro is the study of man's rudimental mind. He would appear rather a degeneracy from the civilized man than a savage rising to the first step, were it not for his total incapacity for improvement. He has not the ring of the true metal. There is no rich nature for education to cultivate. He seems to belong to one of those childish races, never rising to man's estate, who fall like worn-out links from the great chain of animated nature.
Another famous explorer, Samuel Baker, who passed through this very district in his search for the source of the Nile, wrote in his memoirs,
"Human nature, viewed in its crudest state as seen amongst African savages, is quite on the level with that of the brute, and not to be compared with the noble character of the dog. There is neither gratitude, pity, love, or self-denial, no idea of duty, no religion, nothing but covetousness, ingratitude, selfishness, and cruelty."
In a manner which seems quite unforgivable today, Europeans in the 18th and 19th centuries preferred to forget what their forebears had known very well, that kingdoms flourished in West Africa which were as sumptuous and as well governed as any in medieval Europe itself. What is more, the reports of traders and diplomats who visited these kingdoms assumed no attitudes of racial superiority. Racism, in fact, is a rather modern sickness. Nothing more clearly illustrates the change that was to come than the European art of the Renaissance, and earlier still. White and black take their place in these paintings with equal dignity. There's no hint here of what a later world was to call human nature in its crudest state. And this acceptance of equality between black and white had also been a keynote of the Middle Ages. Among the revered saints of Central Europe was the black martyr, St. Maurice. As we shall see, he is one of the heroes of this story. What then was the cause of this enormous change in white attitudes from equality to racist prejudice? History gives one dominating reply: the Atlantic trade in slaves. Based in strong castles on the West African coast, the nations of Europe vied with each other in the massive removal of millions of captured men and women. Their guns were not pointed at Africa, which was seldom regarded as a source of danger, but out to sea, ready to face rival ships suddenly appearing over the horizon. Africans, of course, had not been the only victims of racism and color prejudice. But if, as I believe, they've suffered more acutely than the other peoples of the world, the reason lies here. For over 300 years, this magnificent coast was the scene of organized and systematic cruelty. Year after year, black people were dragged from their homes into the white man's world of misery and degradation. They were presented as less than human, objects for buying and selling, like cattle, against whom any act of violence and debasement was justified. Wherever the slave trade spread its ruin, the stability and fabric of African life were destroyed. But something else was also destroyed, and that was the mutual respect which had previously existed between white and black. But after all, the slave trade ended a long time ago. Surely it's time to think again. Those old ideas about black inferiority were completely wrong, without a foundation. As it happens, modern science has given us a vast fund of new and reliable knowledge which shows that the black peoples do indeed have a history of their own, as rich and strange, as long and sometimes surprising as any major branch of the human family.